January 17th, 1945, the Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The fog hung low over the frozen earth, like a burial shroud. Snow fell in slow, deliberate curtains, muffling the world beneath a silence that felt almost sacred. Through the skeletal trees, a column of German soldiers trudged westward, their breath forming pale ghosts in the bitter air. Their boots crunched through ice-crusted mud, each step a small negotiation with exhaustion. They had been walking for 3 days. Ahead, barely visible through the white haze, sat the wreckage of war, a Tiger tank, 45 tons of German engineering pride, listing at a grotesque angle in a roadside ditch. Its tracks had broken through the frozen crust the night before, and now it sat half-submerged in Belgian mud, useless as a monument. The crew had abandoned it hours ago, joining the retreat on foot. Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann stood beside the tank, staring at it with the hollow gaze of a man who had stopped asking why. Then he heard it. A sound so absurd in that landscape of frozen despair that he thought at first he was imagining it, a high-pitched mechanical whine, like an angry insect growing louder. Through the fog emerged something that made Hartmann blink in disbelief. It was a vehicle, if you could call it that, barely larger than a motorcycle with 4 wheels. Its hood reached perhaps to a man's waist. It had no doors, no roof, no protection whatsoever. And painted on its olive-green side, almost mockingly small, was a white star, an American Jeep. Hartmann's first reaction was laughter, not the kind born of joy, but the bitter, exhausted laughter of a man confronted with the final cosmic joke. This tiny, toy-like contraption, this Kinderwagen, this baby carriage, had followed them into the Ardennes, into the frozen hell that had swallowed their offensive whole. He turned to the soldier beside him, Gefreiter Ernst Vogel, and pointed. "Look," he said, his voice cracking. "The Americans send their children's toys to fight us now." Vogel didn't laugh. He was watching the Jeep with the intensity of a man who had learned, too late, that nothing in this war was what it seemed. This is a story about a machine no one respected until it saved them, about how abundance looks like weakness until it becomes salvation, about the moment German soldiers stopped laughing at American engineering and started understanding what they were truly fighting against. In 1940, when the United States Army issued a requirement for a lightweight reconnaissance vehicle, the request seemed almost quaint to observers of modern mechanized warfare. The specifications read like a wish list from a logistics clerk having a nervous breakdown. A 1/4-ton, 4-wheel drive vehicle that could carry 3 men, traverse any terrain, operate in any climate, be simple enough for any soldier to repair, and cost less than $750. The vehicle had to weigh under 1,300 pounds. It had to reach speeds of 50 miles per hour. It had to be designed, prototyped, and delivered for testing in 49 days. The German General Staff, had they been paying attention, would have found this hilarious. They were not paying attention. In 1940, Germany had already conquered Poland, Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. Their panzer divisions had rewritten the rules of modern warfare, turning the static trench nightmares of the previous war into a fluid dance of armor, air power, and coordinated assault. The Blitzkrieg wasn't just a tactic, it was a philosophy. Speed, shock, overwhelming force concentrated at decisive points. The German war machine moved like a predator, and the rest of Europe had been its prey. Against this backdrop, the American military's obsession with a lightweight utility vehicle seemed positively provincial. What use was a tiny car when tanks decided battles? What purpose could a vehicle without armor serve when Messerschmitts owned the skies? The answer came from a company called Willys Overland, which delivered its prototype on November 13, 1940. They called it the Willys MA. It looked like something a child might draw. A rectangular body, 4 wheels, a flat hood, a steering wheel. No frills, no excess, just function distilled to its essence. Ford Motor Company soon joined production under license, and by 1941 the vehicle had a name that would outlast the war itself: the Jeep. Soldiers gave it other names. Peep, Leaping Lena. The Blitz Buggy, Spirit of 76. War correspondent Ernie Pyle called it faithful as a dog, strong as a mule, and agile as a goat. But in the early days, as the first Jeeps rolled off assembly lines in Toledo, Ohio, many officers remained skeptical. It seemed too small, too light, too simple. European roads required trucks. Battlefields required armor. What could this undersized runabout possibly contribute? German intelligence analysts, reviewing early reports of American military equipment, noted the Jeep's existence with mild interest and no concern whatsoever. It was catalogued alongside other American curiosities: the tendency to over-engineer field kitchens, the bizarre devotion to coffee rather than tea, the industrial capacity that seemed impressive in peacetime, but would surely prove irrelevant against disciplined, battle-hardened Wehrmacht divisions. They were looking at a photograph of a mouse and failing to see the shadow of the elephant behind it. By December 1944, the illusions had begun to crack, but the ideology remained intact. Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann had joined the Wehrmacht in 1939, a 17-year-old from Heidelberg who believed everything his teachers and officers told him. Germany was strong. Germany was disciplined. Germany would reshape Europe into something glorious and eternal. The Americans, when they finally came, would be soft, undisciplined, reliant on their factories because they lacked the warrior spirit. He had believed this through the invasion of France, through the brutal winter campaigns in Russia, where he learned what cold truly meant, through the slow, grinding retreat westward as the Red Army pushed back with a fury born of genocide survived. He had believed it even after D-Day, when the reports came of Americans landing in Normandy. They would be stopped. They would break against German defenses like waves against stone, but they didn't break. They kept coming, and they brought with them something Germany no longer had. More tanks, more planes, more ammunition, more food, more fuel, more men, more of everything, in quantities that seemed to violate the natural laws of wartime scarcity. And Jeeps. God in heaven. So many Jeeps. Hartmann first saw one in France in August, during the chaotic retreat from the Falaise pocket. His unit had been moving at night, trying to avoid the fighter bombers that owned the daylight sky. They heard it before they saw it, that distinctive high-pitched engine sound, somewhere between a whine and a growl. Then it appeared, racing down a farm road at impossible speed, 3 American soldiers aboard, the driver steering one-handed while eating something from a can. It bounced over ruts that would have broken the axles of a Kübelwagen, recovered, and kept going. One of the Americans saw Hartmann's group and waved, actually waved, as if this were a Sunday drive, before the Jeep disappeared into the darkness, its red taillights blinking like demon eyes. What the hell was that? Vogel had asked. Americans? Hartmann replied. They don't know this is a war. But standing in the Ardennes 5 months later, watching that same absurd vehicle approach the stranded Tiger tank, Hartmann was beginning to understand a different truth. Perhaps the Americans knew something Germany had forgotten. The Jeep stopped 20 meters from the Tiger. 2 American soldiers climbed out, both wearing heavy winter coats that looked new, warm, and dry, luxuries Hartmann hadn't experienced in months. One was tall and lanky, the other shorter, broader. Neither looked particularly concerned about the dozen German soldiers watching from the tree line, too exhausted to be a threat and too cold to care. The taller American walked around the Tiger, examining it with the casual interest of a farmer appraising a neighbor's broken tractor. He said something to his companion, who laughed and shook his head. Then they returned to the Jeep, and the shorter soldier began unspooling something from the front bumper, a steel cable, thin but clearly strong, attached to a winch. Hartmann felt that bitter laughter rising again. He stepped forward, his hands raised to show he held no weapon. "You cannot be serious," he called out in his careful schoolbook English. The taller American looked up, surprised but not alarmed. You speak English? Yes, and I tell you that small car cannot move this tank. This is Tiger, 45 tons. Your toy will break, the American smiled. It wasn't a mocking smile, Hartman realized. It was almost sympathetic. Yeah, the soldier said. That's what my CO said too. But orders are orders. We're supposed to clear the road. He paused, then added, you guys should step back. If something breaks, cable's gonna snap like a whip, Hartman translated for Vogel and the others. They watched, clustered at the edge of the forest, as the Americans attached the cable to the Tiger's towing shackle. The shorter soldier returned to the Jeep and engaged the winch. The cable went taut. The Jeep's engine sound changed, dropping to a lower, laboring growl. Nothing happened. Hartman felt vindicated. See, the laws of physics still applied. Mass and weight and force still mattered. A tiny vehicle could not move The Tiger shifted. It was small at first, barely perceptible. A slight rotation, the hull moving a few centimeters in the mud, then more. The Jeep's wheels bit into the frozen ground, finding purchase. The winch kept pulling, steady and relentless. The Tiger began to slide, slowly, grudgingly, like a sleeping beast dragged from its den. The Jeep's frame shook with the effort, but it held, and kept pulling. 5 minutes later, the Tiger sat back on level ground. Still dead and useless, but no longer blocking the road, Hartman stood in silence, watching the Americans disconnect the cable and rewind it. The shorter soldier patted the Jeep's hood with genuine affection, the way a man might pat a loyal horse. They climbed back in, and the taller American looked over at the Germans one more time. "Hey!" he called out. "You guys need a ride somewhere?" Village down the road's got a POW collection point. Hot soup, probably. For a long moment, Hartman didn't answer. He was thinking about the Tiger tank, pride of German engineering, designed to be invincible. And he was thinking about the little American Jeep that had just dragged it from the mud like it was nothing. Not through superior design or overwhelming power, but through simple, dogged utility. Through being exactly what it needed to be, nothing more and nothing less. He thought about the cable stored on that front bumper, ready for any contingency. He thought about the American soldier eating from a can while driving at speed through enemy territory, as if hunger and haste were problems that could both be solved simultaneously. He thought about the warmth of their coats and the casualness of their offer, hot soup for prisoners, as if abundance were so natural that even enemies could share in it. "Yes," Hartman heard himself say. "Yes, we need a ride." The Jeep became something else in that moment. Not a vehicle, but a symbol. A key that unlocked understanding. Production numbers tell part of the story. Between 1941 and 1945, American factories built 647,925 Jeeps. Not hundreds, not thousands, nearly 2/3 of a million. They rolled off assembly lines in Toledo and Detroit at a rate of 1 every 90 seconds during peak production. They were shipped to Britain, to North Africa, to Italy, to France, to the Pacific Islands, to China, to Russia. Everywhere American forces went, Jeeps went first. But numbers alone don't explain what German soldiers began to notice as the war ground through its final years. The Jeeps were everywhere, yes, but they were also doing everything. Reconnaissance, communications, ambulance service, cargo transport, machine gun platform, anti-tank rocket launcher, officer transport. They towed artillery pieces through mud that stopped horses. They evacuated wounded men from positions tanks couldn't reach. They carried ammunition to forward positions, returned with prisoners, and went back for more. In the North African desert, Jeeps mounted with 50 caliber machine guns hunted Axis supply columns across hundreds of miles of wasteland. British long-range desert group commandos called them the best small fighting vehicle ever built. In the Pacific, Marines drove them through jungles where roads didn't exist, using them to haul supplies up mountainsides and wounded men down. In Italy, they navigated mountain tracks so narrow and steep that German officers examined the tire marks afterward and refused to believe a vehicle had made the climb, and they could be repaired by anyone, anywhere with basic tools. German mechanics, accustomed to the precise engineering tolerances of Wehrmacht vehicles, were astonished by the Jeep's brutal simplicity. Everything was accessible. Everything was repairable. If a part broke in the field, a competent soldier could replace it in minutes with minimal tools. The engine was so straightforward that captured German mechanics, asked to evaluate the design, initially assumed they were looking at an incomplete schematic. "Where is the rest?" One engineer reportedly asked a British interrogator in 1943, studying a Jeep's engine diagram. "That's all of it," came the reply. The engineer frowned. "But it is too simple." "How does it work reliably?" "Because it's simple." This was a philosophical statement as much as an engineering one, and it cut to something deeper than mechanics. German military equipment was designed with precision and complexity, each component machined to exacting standards, each system optimized for peak performance. This created magnificent machines: the Tiger tank's 88 mm gun, the Messerschmitt Bf 109's aerodynamics, the U-boat's diesel-electric drive. But it also created vulnerability. Complexity requires expertise to repair. Precision requires specialized tools. Optimization for peak performance often means fragility under suboptimal conditions. The Jeep rejected all of this. It was designed not for perfection, but for good enough, everywhere, always. It would never be the fastest vehicle, or the strongest, or the most comfortable. But it would start in Arctic cold and desert heat. It would run on poor quality fuel. It could be fixed by a mechanic or a cook or a clerk with a wrench in 30 minutes. It embodied a philosophy German soldiers began to recognize with creeping unease. American abundance wasn't just about quantity. It was about accepting imperfection in service of overwhelming presence. It was better to have 1,000 simple machines everywhere than 100 perfect machines in the right places, because the right places kept changing, and quantity had a quality all its own. Ernst Vogel saw this most clearly. Before the war, he had been an engineer at Daimler-Benz, working on diesel engines for commercial trucks. He understood machinery the way a poet understands language, intuitively, completely. When he was conscripted in 1940, the army made him a vehicle mechanic, maintaining the Kubel wagons and trucks that kept German units mobile. By 1945, maintenance had become a nightmare. Spare parts were scarce. Manufacturing tolerances had declined as German industry struggled under Allied bombing. Vehicles broke down constantly, and Vogel performed miracles with wire, ingenuity, and prayers to a God he wasn't sure existed. He kept equipment running through sheer, stubborn expertise, but he knew it was futile. For every truck he fixed, 2 more broke beyond repair. When Hartmann and 5 others climbed into that American Jeep, 3 in the back, 2 clinging to the sides, 1 in the passenger seat beside the driver. Vogel ended up perched on the rear left fender, holding onto the frame with both hands. The ride to the village was rough, the Jeep bouncing over frozen ruts at speed, but Vogel wasn't thinking about comfort. He was thinking about the machine itself, the suspension, the 4-wheel drive, the power-to-weight ratio, the way the driver shifted gears with casual confidence, never worried about breaking something. The cable winch mounted to the front bumper, always ready. The jerrycan brackets on the rear, carrying extra fuel and water. The rifle mounting on the dashboard. The complete absence of anything decorative or unnecessary. It was beautiful, Vogel realized. Not in the way a cathedral was beautiful through aspiration and ornament. Beautiful in the way a hammer was beautiful, through perfect marriage of form and function. The American driver noticed him staring. "You like her?" he asked, patting the steering wheel. Vogel's English was poor, but he understood. "It's good," he managed. The driver grinned. "Damn right. This baby's pulled me out of more shit than I can count." He was young, maybe 22, with an accent Vogel couldn't place. "Had her since Normandy. Same Jeep, whole time. Oil changes, new tires twice, replaced the clutch once. That's it. She just keeps going, since Normandy." Vogel did the math. 7 months of continuous operation, through one of the most intensive military campaigns in history. And this soldier spoke of the vehicle like a trusted companion, not a piece of equipment wearing out toward inevitable replacement. They reached the village as afternoon light began to fail. American military police had set up a collection point in a church, and true to the soldiers' word, there was soup, thin but hot, with actual chunks of potato and carrot. There was bread, dark and dense. There was coffee, bitter and strong. Hartman and Vogel and the others sat on church pews, holding tin cups in cold-numbed hands, watched by American guards who looked neither cruel nor particularly interested. Through the church's side window, Vogel could see the Jeep parked in the square. 3 more had joined it, and American soldiers were servicing them with practiced efficiency. One team changed a tire, another checked oil levels and topped off fluids. A third examined a front axle with critical attention. They worked quickly but without hurry, the motions of men performing a familiar ritual. As Vogel watched, a convoy of trucks arrived. Big Studebakers and GMCs painted olive drab, each pulling a trailer. The trucks stopped, engines idling, and soldiers began unloading supplies. Crates of ammunition, jerrycans of fuel, boxes of rations, medical supplies, more tires, spare parts. The pile grew and grew, material abundance stacked in the village square like an offering to some god of plenty. And jeeps moved through it all, carrying officers, towing trailers, shuttling supplies, connecting everything to everything else. They were the circulatory system of the American war machine. Vogel understood. The tanks and artillery were muscle, the infantry were bone, but jeeps were blood, flowing everywhere, delivering what was needed, removing what was not. "We lost," Hartman said quietly, sitting beside him. Vogel turned. Hartman was staring at his soup, his face grey with exhaustion and realization. "We lost this war in 1940, Hartman continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "We just didn't know it. Because we were counting tanks and planes and soldiers. We thought war was about the strength of your fist. But it isn't. It's about the strength of your arm, your shoulder, your legs, your whole body. All of it, working together, supplied and fed and moving." He gestured at the window, at the jeeps and trucks and the organized chaos of American logistics. "They have that. We never did. We had a strong fist and we punched hard," but he trailed off. Vogel understood. Germany had built the Tiger tank. Powerful, magnificent, terrifying. But the Tiger required specialized transport trains, consumed fuel at ruinous rates, broke down frequently, and needed expert crews and mechanics. America built the Sherman tank, weaker, simpler, adequate. But they built 50,000 of them, and each one could be repaired by ordinary soldiers, ran on whatever fuel was available, and could be replaced within weeks if destroyed. The Jeep was the Sherman philosophy perfected. Not the best at anything except being everywhere, all the time doing whatever needed to be done. The epilogue of this story isn't written in any single moment, but in thousands of small moments accumulated across continents and years. It's written in the records of the 101st Airborne Division in Bastogne, encircled and freezing during the Battle of the Bulge, where jeeps made resupply runs through German lines at night, headlights off, navigating by memory and moonlight, to deliver ammunition and evacuate wounded. It's written in the memoirs of Soviet officers who received jeeps through Lend-Lease and used them to race ahead of tank columns during the drive to Berlin, providing reconnaissance that saved thousands of lives. It's written in the photographs of liberated concentration camps, where jeeps arrived carrying medical supplies and exhausted survivors who could no longer walk. It's written in letters home from American soldiers who described the Jeep with genuine affection, as if it were a living thing. "Our Jeep is named Rosie," one corporal wrote to his mother in March 1945. "She's been with us since France. She's ugly and loud and uncomfortable as hell, but I swear she's got a soul. When we finally get to Berlin, I'm going to kiss her hood." It's written in the post-war period, when jeeps became the foundation for civilian vehicles worldwide. The British Land Rover, the Japanese Toyota Land Cruiser, the Soviet UAZ 469. Every modern SUV and utility vehicle traces its lineage back to that 1940 Army specification and the machine Willys Overland created in response. But perhaps most importantly, it's written in the changed understanding of what war actually was in the industrial age. Generals speak of strategy and tactics. Historians speak of decisive battles and turning points. But soldiers understood that wars are won in the space between battles, in the ability to move supplies forward and wounded backward, to maintain communication and cohesion, to keep armies fed and equipped and mobile across hundreds or thousands of miles. The Jeep was never going to win a battle by itself, but it won the war by making victory possible everywhere simultaneously. Klaus Hartmann survived the war. He spent 3 months in a prisoner of war camp in France, was released in May 1945, and returned to Heidelberg to find his family home damaged but standing. He never spoke much about his military service, but his grandson later reported that Hartmann kept a small photograph in his study, a grainy black and white image of a Jeep parked at an angle, 2 American soldiers leaning against it with cigarettes and tired smiles. "What's that, Opa?" the grandson asked once. "A lesson," Hartmann replied, "about underestimating simple things." Ernst Vogel emigrated to America in 1952, sponsored by a distant cousin in Michigan. He found work as a mechanic in Detroit and eventually joined General Motors, where he spent 30 years helping design commercial truck engines. On his first day at the GM Proving Grounds, he saw a line of vintage Jeeps maintained for historical purposes. He stopped, stood there for a long moment, then continued to his assignment. But co-workers reported that Vogel would sometimes visit those Jeeps during lunch breaks, walking around them slowly, occasionally touching the frame or the hood with something like reverence. When asked once why he seemed so interested in such old vehicles, Vogel considered the question carefully. "They taught me," he said finally in accented but clear English, "that the best answer is usually the simplest one. And that abundance is a kind of wisdom Germans forgot. The fog in the Ardennes lifted eventually, as fog always does. The war ground forward to its inevitable conclusion. The Tiger tanks and Panther tanks and all the magnificent complex machinery of German engineering were destroyed or captured or abandoned. The Wehrmacht supply lines, always tenuous, collapsed completely. Soldiers retreated on foot, hungry and cold, while American and Soviet armies advanced on roads filled with trucks and jeeps, and in villages across France and Belgium and Germany, people emerged from cellars and hiding places to see American soldiers arriving in those strange little vehicles, too small, too simple, too cheerful to be instruments of war, yet undeniably victorious. Children gathered around the jeeps, curious and frightened. Soldiers shared chocolate and chewing gum, the casual generosity of an army that had so much it could afford to give away luxuries. The jeeps kept moving, carrying MPs and engineers and supply officers, coordinating the vast machinery of occupation and reconstruction. In one Belgian village, an old man watched an American convoy pass, tanks and half-tracks and trucks, and threading through them all, jeeps darting like minnows among whales. He turned to his daughter and said in French, "The ones who win wars are not always the strongest. Sometimes they are simply the ones who can be everywhere at once." She nodded, not fully understanding but sensing the truth beneath the words, and the jeeps kept going, their high-pitched engines echoing off ancient stone buildings, carrying the future forward into a world that would be shaped, in countless small ways, by the philosophy they represented, that simple solutions, mass-produced and deployed universally, could change everything. That abundance wasn't weakness, but a form of strength no fortress could withstand. That the tiny vehicle dismissed with laughter could pull tanks from mud, armies from defeat, and the entire course of human history toward outcomes no one predicted, but everyone would recognize as inevitable once they arrived. The Germans had laughed at the Jeep, but the Jeep had the last word, spoken not in any language, but in the universal tongue of presence, utility, and relentless, uncomplicated there-ness. It had been everywhere, done everything, and in doing so, written itself into memory not as a weapon, but as something stranger and more powerful. a promise that the future belonged to those who could imagine simple answers to complex problems, who valued presence over perfection, and who understood that wars are won not by the strongest blow, but by the thousand small efforts that make strong blows possible. In the end, the Jeep didn't conquer Germany. It simply outlasted everything Germany built to stop it. And that was victory enough.